I must admit, when I first saw what I was going to speak on this morning, I thought, what an interesting time to talk about discipleship. An interesting time to think about how we become more Christ-like, how we make more disciples, how we become disciple-making disciples. At a time when churches are closed, when everything that is normal is abnormal, everything's different, everything's via Zoom or in different ways. And I thought it was really interesting, because for me, that little video clip said, what about if we put away what we know and move forward to an unknown time, a time of doing things differently, and maybe the outcome will be different. And so the theme, when I saw it, was discipleship. What are you doing for God? And in brackets, it said, based on the APEC mission statement. So I'm not going to test you all. I'm not going to ask you what the APEC mission statement is, because if I'm honest, I had to go on the website and find out myself. The APEC mission statement states, reaching people for Jesus. Yep, I agree with that. Helping each other to become more committed and effective disciples of God. That's hard to disagree with. And I don't disagree with it. I think it's a brilliant statement. But I think we can agree with the principle, but I think maybe the how is changing. I think, many of you have probably seen that there is a questionnaire, a survey going out around the church, talking about what you've experienced through the lockdown period and what church could look like in this new normal that we're heading towards, hopefully. If you haven't done one of those, please fill one in, send it back. It'd be really helpful for the elders and the trustees, everybody, to just consider what the new normal is for APEC and for us as individuals. Because discipleship doesn't necessarily mean that you need a church or a building or a project or an event. A disciple followed Jesus, as we heard read by Remy. Jesus just said, follow me, and they followed. And then, as we saw at the end of that clip, many of them went on to create disciples themselves, because they'd learnt, they'd watched, they'd seen and done, and then they started to do themselves. Many years ago, my stepdad, when he first walked into a job, he was an apprentice. He walked into Courtall's down on Fosel Road, and I don't think he had a clue what he was walking into. He was going to become a machine tool fitter. All these years on, I still don't really understand what a machine tool fitter is or does, but that's what he was going to do. And he stood at the shoulder of somebody who, first of all, he watched. Second, after time, he had a little go and he learnt and he did the basic bits. And then over time, he became skilled. And many years later, when he first attempted to retire, they did everything they could to keep him. They were offering voluntary redundancy to people, and he tried to take it. And they said, oh no, we'll pay you more to stay. And so in the end, he became the apprentice who became the master who was training apprentices. And that was his career. He never worked anywhere else. And it made me think of, I'm sure some of you have seen the TV show The Apprentice. If I'm honest, I'm not sure I like it. I usually watch about 10 minutes of the first episode, shout a lot at the television, and then turn it off. For those who've never seen it, or maybe to remind you a little bit of it, Sir Alan Sugar picks a group of young, professional, eager, confident, egocentric, and usually not very nice candidates, very young guys and girls. And then over the next few weeks, we see the group slowly picked apart. It's a bit like watching an Attenborough nature program with a pack of gazelles slowly being kind of taunted and ripped apart by lions. Rather than picking the best, each week we see those who are considered the weakest or the worst being torn apart. And I wonder sometimes whether the winner was the one with the most staying power rather than the one with the most skill. And of course, each week you see Sir Alan do his little catchphrase of, you're fired. And and eventually the last one is hired. And so many times we see now, in looking back at the shows, a lot of the people who were hired actually haven't done that very well for themselves. They've really struggled. And I think they've used the phrase apprentice, and they don't really understand what apprentice means. It seems much more gladiatorial, and it's like being sent to the lions. In the show, you see the apprentices set tasks, but they're not given advice, they're not given training, they're not given leading. It's expected that because they've done some stuff in the past, they must be able to do this. And surely, my understanding of an apprentice, I know if I spoke to my stepdad, that his understanding of apprentice means learning from a mentor, learning from the master. And we know that being a disciple of Christ means that actually we are learning from him. If we watch an experienced teacher, if we watch somebody who knows what they're doing, then the young apprentice can develop skills. They are in a safe environment where they can take risks and have a go before being released to move forward alone. And that is what I love about the passage that Remy read earlier. Jesus' words are really, really simple. Come, follow me. Rather than scouring the country looking for the most eloquent and theologically sound rabbis, rather than having a competition at the temple, who would be the best to work with Jesus, this up-and-coming rabbi, Jesus just picks the ordinary, maybe even the marginalised, the different, the on the edge of society. But Jesus chose who he saw potential in, not those with the best CV. I'm pretty sure most of the disciples would have been kicked out in the first week of The Apprentice, because as we read through the Gospels, we see most of them haven't got a clue. They haven't got a clue what Jesus is doing. They don't have a clue of the purpose behind what Jesus is doing, but there is something that draws them in. And he picked them, and he picks us. He picks each one of us this morning. And if you're sitting there thinking, he couldn't possibly pick me, I have nothing to offer, trust me, Jesus picks you this morning. He says 3 simple words to you today. Come, follow me. But is the phrase in order? Sometimes when Ondi and I have a misunderstanding, and she's not here, but she wouldn't mind me saying this. When we have a misunderstanding, sometimes one of us will say something, but the other one hears it in a different way. And sometimes these phrases can be confusing. Come follow me, is it an order? Is it an offer? Or an invitation? Or is it a request? Each one of us may hear it differently. But Jesus is calling us to follow him. And as I say, different disciples saw that call differently. But their response was pretty much the same. In verse 18, once they left their nets and followed him. And verse 20, without delay he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. I just have this image in my head of them diving into the water, and that's it, they've gone. And everybody's sitting there thinking, what happened? Maybe it wasn't quite that simple, and it's an image of actually their response. But I love the idea of, without question, they follow him. They recognised his voice, and they responded to his call. And immediately their apprenticeship had begun. So what happened when you followed Jesus? How long did it take you to follow him? Did you accept the apprenticeship without question? Or did you try and negotiate a better deal with the boss? Did you just drop off your old life, ready to set off on pastures new? I was talking to someone the other day and I said, I hear you're moving. And they said, yeah, we will be as soon as God tells us when to go. And I thought, actually, that's an amazing attitude of a disciple, somebody who was willing to follow Jesus when and wherever he calls them. So what about you? Are you full in for God? Are you following him? Have you dived into the water? Or are you still considering your response? We seem to be living more, certainly pre-lockdown, in a world where we could be going back to return of apprenticeship, so a return to learn skills from people who have those skills before we lose them completely. learning at the shoulder of a mentor or a teacher, learning skills from somebody with more experience. Apprenticeships are not a new idea. They've been around for a long time. And obviously in this country, but if you go back to Bible times, if a young boy was recognised as having potential to be a rabbi at a very early age, and a lot of you know this, but at a very early age, they would have expected you to memorise and understand the first few books of the Bible. Well, I'm 51 and I can't do that. Within a few years of that, they would have expected to know that every word, every nuance in the whole Old Testament. And at any point, their rabbi would be able to stop them and say, it says in this, what do you think? And they should be able to discuss and debate at any point with a moment's notice. So Remy's a girl, she wouldn't have been allowed to, but in today's world, we think, I kind of think she should be. But Remy's 10, nearly 11. And so she would have been going through that process of having to learn far more than most of us collectively know about the Old Testament. And if you make one mistake, that would have been it. So very similar to the Sir Alan Sugar, you're fired. And only at that point, if they move beyond all of those tests and succeed, would have they possibly, even then they could have been dropped, but possibly only then would they have been picked to learn at the shoulder of a rabbi. And after all of that work, only now was it considered that the real apprenticeship would begin. The chosen apprentice would spend every waking moment with their rabbi. And there is a phrase, being covered in the dust from your rabbi's feet. It was expected you would follow so closely, so diligently, that the dust off his sandals would be kicked up on you as you learned. Ghosting means something different in young people's world today. But when I was starting in some of the work I did, they'd go, oh, if you just ghost that person, if you kind of almost shadow that person, if you follow that person, you will learn that job before you move on to do that job fully. That's what's happening here. A young apprentice, a young person would follow the rabbi so closely, and as long as they were watching and listening and learning, would learn what it meant to be a rabbi. Come follow me and I will send you out to fish for people. Jesus was offering them an opportunity to learn at his shoulder. Jesus was expecting the disciples to get covered with the dust he kicked up. He was expecting them to watch, to learn, to listen, and to go forward, and actually in time to do. And that's what Jesus offers us today as disciples. And we can't use the excuse of church is closed, because the question of what are we doing for God is just as relevant today in lockdown as it is when we've got church. Because as that little video clip showed us, actually we should. Because if we do, in years to come, APEC will die, as will many churches around our country, because we will be so insular that we won't worry about the world. But God calls us to be fishers of men, not keepers of the aquarium. So what does that mean for us? Jesus calls us to follow him and go fishing. And I think there are a few things that we need to take from this and learn from this. The first thing is actually commitment. Commitment to the cause. If we were in church, this probably would receive a few boos now, so you can boo at home. Just leave mute on, so I don't need any heckling. I've been a lifelong Liverpool football fan. I supported Liverpool back in the day when it was actually trendy to support Liverpool because they were good. And then they went through a long time of not being so good. And now we're okay again. Apart from the last match, we don't talk about that. But I saw an interview the day when they were interviewing the Liverpool manager, and they were talking about this moment, what you've done now, as how do you feel about what's happened now? And he was very quick to talk about, actually it isn't about now, it's about all that's come before. It's all about what we've learnt, almost as apprentices. It's about the effort, the commitment. The disciples are called and they go. And we see, for using Liverpool Football Club as an idea, is people come to a club, a football club, and they don't just suddenly become the best player in the world every week. They have to practice, they have to learn, and they usually learn from someone better. They are challenged to improve. And actually, that's what we need. We need to be committed to the cause. I wonder how many of us, if we're honest, and I'm looking at myself here as well as your lovely faces on the screen, how many of us have just took our foot off the pedal a little bit since we've been in lockdown? How many of us have gone, it doesn't matter because church isn't really happening, and actually just step back a little bit? For some of us, we may have put our foot further on the pedal, and we may be reading the Bible more, we may be reaching out to people more, we may be evangelizing and being a disciple making disciple. But I know for me, there's been periods where the foot's come off the pedal a bit. I've just slowed down a little bit. But actually, we need to be committed to the cause. We don't know what's coming next in our world. If you read all the scaremongering, you think, oh, it's going to get worse again. If you listen to those in power, they're going to say it's all going to get better again. I think it's probably somewhere in between. But we just don't know. And we're called to be disciples, to follow Jesus. No one knew where Jesus was going to go. No, the disciples didn't understand really that Jesus was going to the cross, but they still followed him. And we are called as disciples to follow him. No questions, no understanding of what is going to happen next. Would we go? They left security, and they reached a place where they didn't know where their next meal would come from, where they'd sleep that night. They suddenly walked into danger and vulnerability. And later in the Gospel of Mark, we see Jesus say, whoever loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will find it. Jesus was telling them that actually this is a dangerous world that you've come into. Matthew, Gospel of Matthew includes another comment, do not think I've come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. Jesus came to stir things up, and now he's creating followers who will stir things up also. He's telling them that being a disciple is not an easy task. It brings change and new experiences to all who follow him. All who learn from him will learn. The same as when my dad was an apprentice, he learned what it meant to be a machine tool fitter, and then he became an expert. So we need to commit to the cause. We need to submit to his knowledge. It's natural that the teacher knows more than the student. The disciple follows Jesus because they recognize his wisdom. There is something in Jesus that draws them in, and then they listen. They realize that spending time watching, listening, soaking up the atmosphere is going to pay off. And actually, sometimes that's quite difficult to do, that humility, to realize that somebody else knows better. A few years ago, I was leaving one place of work. I was being promoted into something else, and the person who was going to take my role started a couple of weeks early so we could have a crossover period, a period when I could just give them some of the stuff that happened and what they could learn and the different skills they were going to need. And as I was speaking to this person, every time I tried to teach them something, the answer was, yes, I know. Well, let's try it. Oh, yes, I know. Every time the answer was, yes, I know. And so after the 2 weeks, I moved on, and I was sad to hear just a few months later that person left, because actually they didn't learn the skills they needed in order to be able to grow as a disciple in that company. And actually we need to be humble. We need to recognize that actually others know more. I'm sure many of you have learned to drive over the years. It may be many, many years ago. It may be quite recently. Or for some of you, may even be having driving lessons right now. But it would be stupid to get in a car with somebody and then when they instruct you, your answer is, yes, I know. Because actually, driving is really difficult. Ondi got an automatic car for the first time just earlier this year. And the first thing she said is, I've never driven an automatic car. I don't know what to do. Can you show me? And so just a couple of drives around the local area with her, and she learnt the skills she needed, but she didn't have before. we need to submit to God and learn from him what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. James 4 talks about submitting ourselves to God. If you've got time later this week, maybe have a little moment reading James 4, because God is our ultimate authority. He knows best. He knows everything, and we're called to follow him. So we need to have that commitment. We need to be willing to be submissive, and we need to have a desire to keep on keeping on, a desire to follow. In today's world, young people will tell you that to follow means something like to follow somebody on Twitter or Instagram or something like that, something where you can follow someone's life or the life they want to show you in statements, in pictures, in very small worded statements. Just out of interest today, I thought I'd have a look at the top 15 people followed on Twitter. Katy Perry, American singer, is followed on Twitter by 107 million people. Justin Bieber, another singer, followed by 105 million people. Only one out of the top 15 people weren't a celebrity, and that was Barack Obama, who comes in third, who is followed by 105 million people. But all of these people we look to and go, wow, they're celebrities, they're amazing. But actually, are we really bothered by what they say? Do we really want to follow them? If Katy Perry tells me, come follow me, would I? We need to be advised by people who we have a desire to follow. And so that is Jesus or a disciple of Jesus. The disciples saw something in Jesus, something desirable. We don't know because we're not told whether they'd heard of him before, been in contact with him before, but we know that there's something that when they met Jesus, they recognized something special. And it became irresistible to follow. Do we have a desire to follow Jesus no matter what? Do we have a desire to encourage people to become disciple as well? Joshua 24:15 says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So the question today is, as we think about being a disciple, and next week we look at evangelism as part of our mission statement as a church, do we have that desire to follow the Lord? Is it just a historical statement, come follow me, talking to some men that we will never meet, the apprentices that Jesus chose? Or is it a reminder, a call to us in the quiet, come follow me? I'm reminded back in the days when I did my degree and we did a little bit on child development and the different stages of development. And the good news for us as disciples and as disciple-making disciples, if we want to be, is that actually there are stages. If you look at the beginning of Matthew, the bit that Remy read, it's a simple call. Come follow me. Come. Do it now. And then if you read through all of the story of Jesus and the disciples in any of the Gospels, you'll see situations where that group of people around Jesus, and you can think beyond just the disciples to the other followers, the Marys and all of the others that were just in that group, they all experienced Jesus. But they didn't just experience Jesus sitting there talking, they experienced Jesus doing. They stood at the shoulder of Jesus and saw him heal people. They saw him challenge people. They saw him perform miracles, but they also saw him be a man, because we know he's fully man, fully God. They saw who he was. They learned how to behave at the feet of Jesus. So we see that at the beginning of the gospel, it says come. In the middle of the gospel, it says learn. And at the end of the gospel, it says go. In the Great Commission, we're called to go and make disciples. And actually, that's an apprenticeship. That is disciples. And if we come to Jesus, give our heart fully to Jesus, and we spend time with him in the Bible, in prayer, in fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And then when God calls us, we go. And we go and make disciples elsewhere. And we need to have the freedom to move beyond our houses at the moment, but maybe we don't. So many people are moving to Zoom and YouTube and different ways, phone calls and texts, of sharing Jesus with others. And so I want to encourage you this morning, and I'm going to pray now and finish this, but is that actually we do have hope as disciples of Christ. Next week, Bob's going to talk about evangelism and sharing Jesus. But actually we can share Jesus in the way we live, in the way we act, in the way we support others, in the way we just live our lives. Because as we follow Jesus, as we follow the examples in our church and in our families who we look up to as disciples, people will do that to us as well. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for your blessings. I thank you for your opportunity. I thank you for those quiet words, come follow me, that you whisper in our ears. Pray that you will bless us, Lord, today. Help us to follow you. Help us to learn from you. Help us to make mistakes with you, but help us to keep going. And Lord, when the time is right, help us to go in the name of Jesus to make more disciples in this world. Amen. Okay, we're going to have